Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And special guest with us today, we have one of our patrons, Rena Hobbs. Rena, hello.
Hi.
Good to have you with us. So I want to introduce our audience to you because, yeah, absolutely. I want to introduce our audience to you because some of the people, this may bring back some memories whenever I start to mention this, but I actually wrote about your story when I was writing about abuse cover-ups in the Churches of Christ back in 2019. And your story really, it really stuck out to me, and it really resonated because it's so typical of so many churches that I've caught wind of, where they just really radically mistreat the abuse victim. And I don't want to tell your story for you. But I think if ever there's a strong case of an abuse cover-up, combined with parents who did everything right, I think your story is it.
Yes.
So, I think that that radical divide between the way your parents handled this and the way the church mishandled it is just like night and day. So, your story it's an example of how churches should not handle allegations of abuse. So, yeah.
Yeah. Correct.
From start to finish. So tell us a little bit about the abuse that happened and how the church covered it up when you were at Webb Chapel. It's Webb Chapel Church of Christ in Texas. I don't know the town. I don't remember, but that happened when you were just a teenager. Yep. So
I live right down the street from it still.
Oh, wow. That's got to be tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not that part's not as tough as it could be, but so basically story starts it was 90s, mid 90s, 94, 95, something like that. I know the initial police report was done in 95, so I'm not sure of the actual start of stuff, but I was we were at church Sunday night, and the abuser, I don't like saying his name very much, so
sure.
He tricked me. He basically said to me that the youth minister needed to talk to me, and I'm following him to this supposed where the youth minister needed to talk to me, and I kind of got like a small gut feeling that something was off, but I was young and I'd never felt that before, so I didn't know what I was really feeling. I do now. But he lured me to a hallway, and the door that I was told the youth minister was through was locked. It was like, because our church building is two separate buildings where the offices were and where the auditorium and classrooms were. And I tried to go through the door and it was locked. And then that's when he grabbed me and brought me into a room and attacked me. That was the first time. There was two more times that I remember that I remember details of here and there, but I'm pretty sure there had to have been another time, because that time he left a mark, and that is what brought all of this out. That's what prompted everything coming out. But I didn't remember this until you wrote your article, And then I talked to my mom and dad, and they're like, yeah, that's why it came out, because he left a mark on you. So that sorry, it makes me gross. It makes me feel gross.
Sure.
But he so that came out, and then there was it was my there was a friend of mine who was also attacked, and her mom came to my mom and asked questions. And then unbeknownst to, because my parents were trying to do the right thing, so they were trying to follow the Matthew 18. We went to the elders, and then I remember being at an elders meeting. I don't remember details other than I remember the phrase mandatory reporters being said. So when by one of the elders, and then when I was later, when you were writing your article, what I had not realized is I thought they had reported it to the police. I didn't realize my parents were the ones to file the report.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I'd learned some things when you wrote that article.
Yeah, because I had interviewed both you and your dad. And so,
yeah.
I remember you talking to me and saying, I never realized this. And, there were details of this story, your own story, that you learned from me interviewing your father.
And I think part of that was, obviously it's trauma, but part of it was too, I wrote out the details of what happens. And I think once I had done that, it was out of me, and I didn't have to keep it in here. So there are details that I know are in that I don't remember, that I'm sure, and I know that it's floating around somewhere, and my parents have it somewhere, but I know that if I read it, I would probably just I don't know.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of things I have, because my memories, especially on things that are like this, deep and heavy like this, I process things emotionally before I ever process things logically. And so a lot of my memories are more tied to what I was feeling and emotions more than actual details.
Yeah. Yeah. And your dad, he's kind of the opposite, or not the opposite, but he's really detail oriented, and he remembered a lot of the intricate details. And one of the things that he told me, and I think it's significant, a couple of things that are significant for the listeners is, one, both you and your abuser at the time were minors. And that really often gets mishandled by church leaders, because they assume it's a consensual relationship. But I read the police report. In fact, I'll link to the blog post that I wrote back in 2019, because you had given me the police report, and it's very graphic. And I'm not going to have you rehash that on this episode, but the details of what happened to you were horrific. And so there's that component where I hear often from church leaders mistakenly that, oh, well, this was, he was 15, she was 13, this was consensual. It is not consensual. And, I think the other thing, and I wanted you to talk to this a little bit, but that letter that you talked about where you wrote the details down, that was not you voluntarily writing down what happened to you. If I remember correctly, the elders had you write a letter. Is that correct?
Yeah. So about that, basically I was being asked, and I was not verbally speaking. I could not speak it. And so the elder who did recommend I write it down was actually the only elder, at least from as far as my acknowledgement, who was from the beginning on our side, he was the only one.
Mhm.
And he was actually the one who told my parents to have me write it down, because I wasn't, I wasn't, uh, able to speak it. And
Yeah.
because that,
Yeah.
I'm a little more able to speak now, but when I was a kid, I was the very compassionate, mercy, but I also wasn't very verbal. I don't verbalize things very well. And so they had that was why I had to write it. That's why they had me write it down. Now, and I didn't write, I wouldn't write a paragraph even. And then when I was told to write it down, I typed out like 3 or 4 pages worth of information and details. So I was told to write it down, but the one who did say to write it down was not doing it because of some sick, I don't think that was at least from him, he wasn't trying to be he wasn't trying to humiliate me.
Yeah, sounds like most likely he was trying to get accurate information. So one of the things that really stuck out when I was talking to both you and your dad is that, your dad was really adamant, and he said even with them having this letter that you personally wrote, where you bared your soul, those elders still did not report to the police, even though they were mandated reporters. And not only that, when your dad reported, or your mom and dad, they reported to the police, they got angry. There
was one particular elder who got angry. Yes.
Yeah. So, it almost sounded like your family was being painted as the troublemakers in church, which is incredibly common. And I don't know, I wanted to ask you that. Why do you think?
Yeah. Your audio on my end is cutting out a little bit.
We're good on our end.
You're nice and clear here. Yeah. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Huh.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll roll with it as long as you can get the gist of what we're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's really good on our end.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask, why do you think it's so common for church leaders to ignore the cries of children instead of protecting them, they protect the abuser?
Oh, if I knew the answer to that, then we wouldn't have a problem now, would we?
Right. Good point.
My speculation, couple of speculations that I have. And this is not just about my encounters with the leadership, as far as the abuse is concerned, but we had other issues with this particular group of elders at this congregation. When my dad, he spent 80 plus hours one time studying the marriage, divorce, and remarriage issue. Okay. And because he was feeling like they were making a wrong decision. I don't remember what the situation was, but they were making a wrong decision. So he went and studied, spent 80 something hours. Really detailed, had all the information, and he went to them. He's like, look, here is the Greek and the root and everything else. And then they said, well, yeah, we know, but we're going to do it our way anyway.
Wow.
And so that attitude, I feel like, is because I feel like elders tend to become full of themselves, I guess. Just, they feel like they have all the power.
They take charge. Yes. That's
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing is too, a lot of, and this has been bothering me at my current congregation that I've been going to, that I won't name, but there are far too many elders meetings done behind closed doors.
Yes. Thank you for saying
that.
that.
I don't understand, where did they get this idea that they have to have eldership meetings behind closed doors, especially when they're making decisions about the congregation, and which should be, they should be concerned with the safety of the congregation. Mm-hmm. And then they're making these decisions behind closed doors. And if it's a congregational safety issue, it should be out in the open. There should be an open conversation.
Right.
And I've been dealing with that. I've been triggered by that as of late in my current congregation, because there's not open conversations, and it's related to COVID. And I get all the regulations, and I'll leave my opinion out of it.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, there is not open communication. They are not asking the congregation how they feel. They're just they're dictating. They're not leading, they're dictating. And I cannot, it's really, really hard for me to accept being dictated to.
Yeah. I think that's triggering
I just feel
for
like
a lot of survivors.
Yeah.
I really do.
And I did tell them that. I said, look, y'all are acting exactly how my previous church did, or how this congregation did when stuff happened to me, and y'all are doing this. And their communication got a little better, but it's still not open.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just feel like I just have this belief. I don't have very high beliefs in elderships anymore, because it's like, why do they have to be behind closed doors?
Yeah.
Unless they're hiding something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Sorry.
I had written, I'd written
a little bit
an
of a rant there.
Oh, that's all right. No, it's good. No, I think people need to hear that. I hope there are church leaders listening to this. I had written an article. It was like one of the most viral blog posts that I had written. And I think the title of it was, church leaders, you don't have as much authority as you think you do. And I was really calling out this toxic leadership model that's not a scriptural model, that says, it's all the closed door meetings. It's the elders, the buck stops with them, whether it's, you have a plurality of elders or an elder board, however your church is structured. They treat the congregation as their underlings, that they're going to make decisions for them on behalf of them, package them, and hand them down to the congregation and say, here's what you have to do. We decided in a meeting. That is not a healthy or biblical model at all. And I think you're onto something here. And I think that's why so much abuse is swept under the rug, like yours. Because you have that kind of leadership where they're the ones making the decision, and families at church didn't even know that there was an abuse victim in the church, and there ended up being more because of the secret.
Well, yeah. And in my case, there was two that were actually, he was being charged on, and 6 more that were being brought in as that were found out, and they didn't charge on him, but they were character witness type for the sentencing phase or something, I think. But don't quote me on that. I don't really know for sure if that's, but I know there was 6 more. And it is so, the only reason that our story came out is because of the parents, and the parents forced the issue. Now, I will say that one elder I mentioned that was always on our side, his name was Bill Keith, and he was absolutely amazing. But even he at one point said that talking about it publicly would be ruinous and stuff. And then my dad said, listen to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And the elder broke down crying. And it was soon after that they there was 2, it was Bill Keith and one other, I can't remember at the moment, that went to the front of the congregation. And um, uh, said that that family was not going to be there anymore. But they also didn't want the families of the victims to go forward. And, we did end up going forward, fighting tooth and nail, my parents fighting tooth and nail for it. I mean, it sure seems that way. But, again, speaking from my perspective on this, but we filled up. I remember going forward. I don't remember that day, but I do remember being in front of the congregation, and I don't remember what was said. Because again, most of my memories from this point in time I remember how I was feeling. And I'll tell you, not too long after accusations came out, but before he was arrested, it was somewhere in between there. It was either like, I don't remember the exact timeline, because the first police report was filed in May of 95. And I think the court case was in November. But somewhere in between there, because of the response and the secrecy about it, I had to watch him get rebaptized.
Wow.
Because he was too young when he got baptized. And, that was one of the, my abuse, and I know you hear this all the time, but my abuse was bad. But that was like the biggest slap in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everybody was believing him.
Yeah. And that's done by the abuser to garner sympathy.
Yeah. Because, and knowing what I know now, I get it, but it was like, ooh, that was not, that was, I remember that. And it was at that, if it hadn't been for my parents, so, because there were some of the victims, I'm pretty sure there were some victims who probably didn't even come forward because their parents didn't believe them.
Yeah.
And, my parents, I thank God for my parents every day, because, and I thank God that he did get convicted. He didn't get convicted on the other girl's case, but God convicted on mine. And I feel I'm like super fortunate and super blessed by that, just because it's so common for it to not ever be done.
Yes.
How sad is I'm listening here that you had to fight so hard to be believed, and here you have the polar opposite. The abuser goes forward, wants to be rebaptized, and and has the support and the love of the congregation, I'm assuming, and that causes another big bunch of question marks in everybody's mind then about the truthfulness of what you've said. And it just it blows me away. It just really does. I can't imagine how you and your family continue to worship within that congregation. Even you're talking about a maybe 6-month span at this point till things went to court.
And actually I stayed there at that congregation until I met my now husband.
Wow.
And, it's on one hand, I'm glad we didn't leave because I met my husband and I have my kids. I have 6 kids. So, it's like, I feel very fortunate to have, to have that. And we're going to be celebrating 20 years next month. So
that's awesome.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
But we left there soon after because my husband had something, and I'm going to leave this, I'm going to leave it out of the conversation, but he went to the elders about something, and they again were dismissive and didn't want to hear it. And so that's when we left.
It's almost like you were on a pre-trial to prove what you're saying was the truth before anybody would even listen. And that is so wrong. It's just so wrong.
Yeah, they're not. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that not once did anybody. Now, I was a kid at the time, right?
Right.
But in the years since, not once did anyone ever come up to me. No one has ever called me, contacted me, asked me, nothing. So I'm sure, and I know I have been, because I know I've been the source of gossip. So if my mom was, and still is, then I know that I am. So, I'm totally oblivious to that most of the time because I really don't care. I know what I've done and, and didn't do. So,
rare is the person, though, who's strong enough to say that. Usually that kind of gossip and that evil intent, I'll say, of the tongue, that's hurtful. That is so hurtful, and it does so much harm, especially when you are the wounded person and you have those people talking behind your back, not believing, gossiping, taking your truth and distorting it. Those are horrible things.
Well, and there were a couple of things I didn't know about the baptism thing, or I had forgotten about it if I did ever hear about it. But, there were a couple of things that both you and your dad talked about that now it makes sense, because, I got this very strong picture that kind of the elders flexed their spiritual muscles, so to speak, and let you guys know that you were gossiping about a perfectly good kid from the church who, if I remember right, one of the elders was his dad.
Yes.
That's what
it was an elder's son.
And
I think that was a big part of what made this so, difficult because, even my mom had been with that family, had done missionary work with that family, had done, was very active in the church with that family. And, it was so, it's such as you've said, it's really hard for people to believe that somebody who's done so many good things, to believe that they could have that darkness, that level of darkness.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and the baptism, in my mind, just knowing how predators think, one, it was to garner sympathy.
Sure.
But the main purpose of that, and it's highly effective, is to use that sympathy to get people to shut up, because he knew, your abuser knew, that you were a very real threat to the church because you had this truth and you weren't afraid to speak it. And so this baptism.
Well, my parents weren't afraid to speak it. I was still not really speaking it.
Sure. Yeah. But it's this idea that if people talk about me, after I've confessed my wrongs, which, very rarely happens. But, it's this general idea that I've had quote unquote sins, and, now I'm baptized and those sins are washed away. And these people, they're maniacs. They keep bringing this up. Jesus forgave me, and they won't let it go. They're psychopaths. And I think a lot of leaders naively buy into that false notion that somehow it's gossip to tell the truth. And I talk about that a lot, where gossip and truth telling are two very different things. Gossip is making something up about somebody with the intent to harm them, or embarrass them, or whatever. But speaking truth, we should be allowed to speak truth whenever we've been oppressed and badly injured on purpose by somebody.
I think another thing is youth. When you have two young people, there's always that question, which is sad. Well, they were kids.
Mm-hmm.
They were exploring. They were doing whatever. Or what did she do to provoke him?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Oh, I heard that one in court.
I'm sure you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
That drives me crazy. It really
Oh
does.
yeah, they brought out a dress I was wearing. At one of the
Wow.
times.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Right.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And
that was fun.
Wasn't
It was a lot
there
of fun.
No.
I wrote about this, I went back and just kind of browsed through that blog post again just to refresh my memory, but wasn't there a crowd of people there that were there in support of him whenever you were in court?
Yes, as far as I recall, and I again, my memories are more feelings. But yes, I do remember that they were either there for him or for sick curiosity. Like I do not, none of them were there for me. And anyone who was there for me had to be back in that, there's like a room that future witnesses have to sit in. They don't get to sit in on the whole court case. So anybody that was there for me wasn't even able to be in the room.
Wow.
And so I remember walking out of my testimony the first day. I think there was like 2 days that I had to testify. If I remember, I'm pretty sure it was 2 days. But beside the point, when I walked out after my testimony, I remember just running to my dad and bawling. Like I was just bawling because I had to look at him. I had to point at him. I had to rehash details in this courtroom, and all these people are there, not for me. They just, whatever.
The whole scene is so wrong. Yeah. It is just so wrong.
Yeah.
Truly.
And, I don't know if any of them were there to try to get the whole story. I honestly, because nobody has ever from that part of my life has ever asked me anything about it. But
it's easier for people to take tidbits of information and gossip about it than it is to go up to a victim of abuse and say, "I'm just so sorry." I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
I really get it, and it makes me furious.
After we went forward, though, I will say, to the credit of people there was quite a few people who came up later and apologized.
Good.
There was at one point a ladies' Bible class taught on grace.
Okay.
And during this time, and it was obviously directed at my mom, and I don't know, but basically later the person said, "I'm sorry, I thought I had the information straight from the horse's mouth." So there was a lot of, and we found out, or my parents had found out, that they'd gone to a different congregation. My abuser's family went to a different congregation, and they tried to call and warn the youth minister, and I believe it was I can't remember the exact words, but basically gossip and malicious gossip, or something along those lines. That the God, I silenced this. I'm sorry. That the youth minister said that to my parents. Said that to my mom when she called. When the police report was filed, one of the elders called my mom and tried to intimidate her into dropping the charges. And she said, "It's in the state's hands. I can't drop the charges, and I wouldn't if I could." And that made her, he was really, really mean. And it's like, I don't understand this reaction to people. I don't understand people's reaction like this. I never will.
No. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I kind of understand, but
much easier to sweep things under the rug, to say to a person that's been wounded, get it together. You've said what you had to say. Now get it together and stop stirring trouble. And let's go on. Than to deal with the issue at hand. And this is a classic example of what has happened. And it takes years, if not a lifetime, I think, to process the type of trauma you've been through. Seriously. And I don't think but a handful of people get that, because in their mind, okay, you were a kid, this happened, big deal, move on. You're older now, you're married, you have kids of your own, put that in the back and just move on. It doesn't happen that way. And I think that maybe I kind of tend to think of it as a generational thing too, because the generation that the elders, when I was there, I think just that generation never spoke of this stuff. They never were allowed to talk about it. And so one of the first times I even felt vindicated, if you will, was the first video series I watched from you, Jimmy. You were speaking at somewhere in California, I think.
California, yep.
Yeah, but it was that first 6 video series, and I watched that, and that was the first time I had ever felt vindicated. First of all, a preacher of any sort speaking out about this stuff. And then, but in addition to that, a preacher from a Church of Christ, because I'm Church of Christ, and I fundamentally know that doctrine wise, I believe that Church of Christ is, what it should be, but heaven help me, the people within it are some of the meanest people I've met.
Unfortunately, you're right.
So, I mean,
and you are that a lot of this is generational, what you said, because when I was a kid, you were to be quiet, you were to sit in a room, you were not to say anything because you were a kid. I can remember going to my church leaders and 12-year-old about my mother, who was an alcoholic, a really mean alcoholic, and asking for help. And I remember the finger pointed in my face saying,
I had that finger.
Ever talk about your mother like that again. End of discussion. And that was it. That was it. And we were 3 little kids who needed help. No father, alcoholic mother. But so I get what you're saying. And it was never mentioned again, by the way. Never, ever mentioned again. Yours is on a much larger scale, what happened. But I get the shutdown.
There was
a shutdown. It is.
Yeah. The shutdown, not started with the leadership, but it trickled throughout the whole congregation. I'm a teenager, and the youth group ostracized me. Like I had, I think, one person who was ever kind to me after it happened.
It really is.
That's and I remember feeling like every time I would be there that people would just kind of like away from me, that kind of, and I'm just a kid, and I'm not fully, obviously I get it now. Well, I don't get it, but I understand. I'm an adult, so I get it now. But, it's like, I don't understand how people were okay with being that way. I do not understand. And I guess it's a good thing I don't understand.
That's for sure. Well, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the broken sex offender registry, because that's a whole nother 10 podcasts in itself. But in that blog post, which I'll link in the description, I have a link to the sex offender registry in Texas. Your abuser is a lifetime registrant, and he is also considered very high risk.
Yes.
You found out that your abuser was not living in Texas any longer, but the state of Washington. And at the time that I spoke to you a couple years ago, he was not on the state of Washington's registry. You had contacted state police. Do you have any updates on that?
No, because when I called the state police, they told me it's because they couldn't put him any higher than, I think they have like a level 1 where they don't have to be listed on the registry in the state of Washington. And I called them, and they said that because they couldn't access my court files or court case files or whatever, for my case, that they couldn't, they had no reason basically to put him on the higher levels that would match what state of Texas is. So he just gets to live his life, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea where he is. I because it's not like I have an obsession, but it's like when he was here in Texas, I checked on where he was, because he worked at a bar for years, 10 minutes from my house.
Wow.
And so I had a long time where I was scared I was going to run into the dude, and I didn't know what would happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Fortunate, the one thing, I can say the one good thing about Washington and him being not in Texas and not anywhere near me is I don't have to worry about that. And so I do at least have that relief that I don't have to worry about running into him randomly.
Yeah, but it's still got to be that's got to be a really strange feeling, not knowing where he is. And, I know that was one of the things that you talked to me about whenever we spoke, was that, your question that you kept saying is, I don't know if he's volunteering at a church somewhere.
Yeah. Or volunteering with kids or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know he has kids. And he's married to one of his victims' former best friends.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, this, if anything, this episode should be how churches should not handle allegations of abuse. Just, I can't
100% transparency from the beginning. 100% transparency from the beginning. No closed door meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the initial meeting with the victim or whatever, maybe. But the other thing is, parents need to realize they don't have to go to the eldership. They go straight to the police.
Yes.
Because my parents faced the possibility of being prosecuted for delayed reporting from our state.
Crazy. That's a really good point that I think people need to listen to.
Yeah.
The eldership is not the the first stop off point. That is not at all. They did not owe that eldership that. I think your parents, right, were trying to do everything according to scripture, like you said. And by doing so, it caused a whole lot worse.
I don't blame. I have no blame or anything towards my parents, because let's be honest, the teaching of that scripture opens it up for that. It's like, and so I don't have any. But if it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't be here where I am. Like, there's no question I wouldn't be here, because I had a very dark period after all this happened. Even after he was convicted, I still was very dark for a while and very angry. And,
well, I guess so. I mean, it takes a long time to process. You have levels of trauma that occurred in your life because of this.
And it's, as kind of a side note, when you posted your blog post in 2019, it was a year after I went up to Idaho in 2018 to make final decisions for my biological mom, who I hadn't seen since I was 11.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Wow. So that's a whole nother thing. So that I had that level of, I had that trauma, and then this trauma happened not too long after, so it was a very, it was bam, bam. Right. And, so, I've learned since then that my, when you have trauma, your brain reverts back to the age that you had the trauma. Yes. So yeah, wow. It's, knowing all that now, but yeah, it was like you released the blog post, and that was like even more dark wounds. And I'm like, I am not in a good place right now, but I'm, every year, from that, my biological moms and then everything else, I have another layer that comes off, and it's been I've been very, very grateful that I had a platform to tell my story, and I really hope they see it. It's like, the people from that church need to see it. People from my current congregation need to see this, and people all over, because I do not want to, I hope to never hear of a child trying to get out of a situation or you report abuse. And I hope to never hear that the elders just called their parents gossipers. And,
yeah. Well, and I had interviewed both you and your dad. I can't say enough nice things about your dad. He just really, really, really impressed me, continues to impress me. He was and still is very supportive of you. He thinks the world of you. He is a protective father, as a father should be. And I'm very, very proud of him, and have gotten to be friends with him, and just the same with you. And I'm so glad that our paths have crossed, and that
and I didn't realize you were as close in age as you are to me, because I'm 39.
Okay, so we're 2 years apart. That's pretty cool.
And speaking of 2 years, all these people in the congregation were like talking about kids. If he had been 2 months old, older, he would have been tried as an adult.
Wow.
Because he was just shy of being 2 years older than me. And in the state of Texas, if you're 2 years older, you get tried as an adult.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, I'll end on this. You're in front of an audience now. You have a captive audience for those of listeners of ours. What message would you like to give to church leaders who might be listening to this podcast right now?
Stop with the secret meetings. Be 1,000% transparent in every decision, and how you came to a decision and why you're coming to a decision. Do not sweep things under the rug. Bring it out in the open immediately. Because if this had been brought out in the open when it happened, there would not have been as many victims. There would not have been the manipulation, because they manipulated the entire congregation. That family manipulated the entire congregation, and would not be surprised if they have continued to manipulate elsewhere. I that's who they are.
Yeah.
And I do not care how unbelievable it is. If it's the more unbelievable it is, the more you should be inclined to believe it, because most people are not going to just make up something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, as a church leader myself, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So it's so important. So important. Well, it's been an honor. We're so glad to finally have you on the podcast. And I know this is it's gonna impact a lot of people. I think a lot of people are really gonna resonate with this. And I just thank you for your transparency and your willingness to talk about a painful subject. And
thank you for your courage. It takes a lot of courage to speak.
Well, I appreciate it, and I just trust that God had this timing for a specific reason. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it was an honor, and to our listeners, we thank you for tuning into this episode, and we will catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.